Here is what the crowd saw. A young woman in a standard-issue medic uniform kneeling on the sun-scorched parade ground of Fort Braxton, her hands moving with the quiet precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Her voice low and steady as she called out medications and vital signs to a trembling junior medic who could barely keep up. Here is what Karen Mitchell saw. Some girl touching her husband. One of these perspectives was about to end a career. It just wasn't the one Karen thought. The summer ceremony at Fort Braxton was the kind of event that looked impressive on paper and felt punishing in practice. It was 95 degrees Fahrenheit at 11 in the morning, the kind of dry, relentless heat that turned dress uniforms into slow cookers and made the parade ground shimmer like the surface of a mirage. Flags hung limp. The military band played on schedule, indifferent to the suffering of everyone present. Specialist Sarah Chun stood at the edge of the medical station, which was nothing more than a folding table, a canvas shade structure, and a green bag that contained more than anyone on base had any reason to expect. She had her phone out, which made her look, to anyone walking by, like exactly what she appeared to be, a young woman in her late 20s who was marginally bored and marginally trying not to show it. She was, in fact, reading a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine on the evolving management of commotio cordis in military field environments. She had been cited in the footnotes of this paper twice, under a name that was not the name on her uniform. Chun. Sergeant Marcus Webb appeared at her elbow with 2 paper cups of water, both already lukewarm. He handed one to her without ceremony. You know, reading during a ceremony is technically a conduct violation, right? I'm on standby, Sarah said, without looking up. I'm standing by to read. Knowledge is always relevant to the mission, Sergeant. Marcus made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He had been working alongside Sarah Chun for 11 months, and he had long since stopped trying to figure her out through normal social channels. She was quiet in a way that was different from shyness, quieter than stillness, somehow, like the surface of a lake the moment before something moves beneath it. She was good at her job in a way that he could not entirely account for with her listed credentials. Once, 6 months ago, she had correctly diagnosed a training ground casualty with a tension pneumothorax in under 40 seconds, by feel and sound alone, before any monitoring equipment had been set up. When Marcus asked her later how she'd known, she had said, the way he was breathing, and then changed the subject. He had thought about that answer a lot since then. On the main platform, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Mitchell was seated in the second row of the dignitaries section, which meant he had been in the direct sun for 53 minutes without access to water. He was 47 years old, and he had been cleared for duty at his last physical, but his last physical had not caught the mild cardiac arrhythmia that had been quietly establishing itself over the past 8 months. His face, to anyone paying attention, was slightly wrong. Too pale at the temples, a faint gray around his jaw, the particular stillness of a man who is concentrating very hard on remaining upright. Sarah's phone was down before he moved. He did not fall dramatically. He tilted, and then he went sideways, and the man beside him made a startled grab that was a second too slow, and then Robert Mitchell was on the floor of the platform with one hand pressed flat against the wood, as though he had simply decided to lie down. Webb, Sarah said, and she was already moving. The crowd froze in that particular way crowds always do in the first seconds of an emergency, a collective suspension of action, everyone waiting for someone else to establish what was real and what the correct response was. Sarah did not freeze. She covered the 30 yards between the medical station and the platform in 12 seconds, vaulting the low rope barrier with a single hand on the post, her bag hitting her hip as she landed. She was kneeling beside Mitchell before the 2 MPs on platform duty had taken more than 3 steps. Sir. Her hand was on his neck. Sir, can you hear me? His eyes were open. His breathing was present but wrong, shallow and irregular, with a specific catch in the rhythm that told her what she needed to know before his lips had gone fully blue. She pulled back his collar, pressed 2 fingers to the carotid, and counted. Marcus. Her voice had not raised in volume, but something in its quality had changed. It was the voice of someone reading from a very clear internal document. I need the AED and the orange kit. Now, not the blue one. On it, Marcus said from behind her. The orange kit was the one she had packed herself 2 months ago, after she had quietly submitted a request to upgrade the station's field supplies. The request had been approved by Dr. Evelyn Park at the base hospital, who had read Sarah's attached justification, a 3-page clinical memo, and had approved everything within 40 minutes without asking a single question about why a 68B medic specialist had the vocabulary and reasoning of a board-certified emergency physician. Private Danny Torres, 19 rows back in the junior enlisted section, watched Specialist Chin work and felt something he could not name settle over him. He had seen medics respond to training casualties before. They moved with urgency and anxiety, the particular energy of someone trying very hard to remember everything they had been taught. Specialist Chin moved differently. She moved the way his uncle, who was a plumber with 30 years of experience, moved when he opened a wall and found a problem, not with panic, but with a specific, absorbed attention that said, "I have seen this before, and I know what to do, and I am already doing it." He reached into his pocket and pressed the button on his phone's camera without fully deciding to. On the ground, Mitchell's heart had done something that it should not have done. Sarah's fingers registered it a half-second before the portable monitor confirmed it. A run of ventricular tachycardia, rapid and unsustained, teetering on the edge of something much worse. V-Tach, unsustained. She spoke for the benefit of Marcus and the junior medic, Private Ramirez, who was kneeling opposite her with the oxygen kit and the expression of someone watching something they did not fully understand. Rate approximately 160. He's holding perfusion, but it's marginal. Ramirez, 100% O2, non-rebreather now. Marcus, charged to 200. 200. Marcus repeated, not questioning, just confirming. 200. His LV function looks compensated. We're not going full defib unless he converts to VFib. Right now I want to watch the rhythm. Ramirez's hands had paused on the oxygen equipment. Shouldn't we wait for? His blood pressure is dropping. We are not waiting. Still calm. Still precise. He has had approximately 40 minutes of heat stress, probable dehydration, and his ECG pattern suggests a structural arrhythmia that has been building for some time. We treat what we have in front of us. Mask on, please. Ramirez put the mask on. 2 of the platform officials had come down to hover nearby, and a crowd had formed around the rope barrier. Officers, their families, civilian contractors, a scattering of junior enlisted personnel who had abandoned the formation ranks and were now being herded back by sergeants who were themselves craning their necks to see. At the base gate, a black vehicle convoy had just been cleared through security. Inside the lead vehicle, a man in a 4-star uniform was reading a briefing folder and had not yet been informed of anything. And at the far edge of the crowd, a black SUV with a Fort Braxton family decal on the rear window had just screeched to a stop in the fire lane. Karen Mitchell got out running. She heard it from the parking lot, a murmur through the crowd, the word Bobby, spoken in someone's voice that carried just enough urgency to reach her, and she crossed the distance between her car and the platform rope at a speed that contradicted her silk blouse and strappy sandals. Let me through. She pushed past a sergeant without seeing him. That's my husband. Let me through. Let me. She stopped. There was a young woman kneeling on the platform floor, her hands on Bobby's chest, her head down, her voice low and clipped as she spoke to the man on her left. A young woman who was. Karen's eyes moved across her face, her build, the unremarkable uniform. No one she recognized. No one she had been introduced to. Some girl in a medic costume who was touching her husband's body with both hands in a way that made Karen's chest go hot and bright with something that was not entirely rational and not entirely not. Hey. Her voice was not loud yet. It was the voice of someone who has not yet committed to a scene. Hey, what are you doing? Sarah did not look up. Ma'am, please step back. This is an active medical emergency. That is my husband. I know, ma'am. Step back, please. Something about the please, patient, unbothered, the tone of someone who was managing a complication alongside several other complications, flipped a switch in Karen Mitchell that had been primed and waiting for years. Get your filthy hands off him. The voice came out of her like a pressure valve releasing, loud enough to cut through the crowd noise and the military band, which had finally, belatedly, stopped playing. Get your filthy hands off him. UWH*re. The word landed in the silence like a dropped weapon. Danny Torres' phone stayed up. His thumb did not move to stop the recording. Several officers nearby went very still in the particular way that people go still when they are witnesses to something that they are going to have to decide whether to acknowledge. A colonel's wife 3 feet away touched her husband's arm and looked at the ground. Two junior enlisted women exchanged a glance that contained an entire conversation. Sarah Chin's hands did not stop. She adjusted the oxygen mask angle. She checked the pulse oximeter reading. She noted Mitchell's color, marginally better, marginally. She spoke to Marcus. Keep the 80 hot. I want to be ready if this degrades. You heard me. Karen's hands were now on the rope, her face flushed, her eyes bright with a fury that had become entirely untethered from its original source. Who are you? What are you doing? Someone get her away from him. Is anyone in charge here? Is there anyone in charge? Ma'am. It was a different voice. Major Gerald Price had arrived. Price was 42 years old, with a face built for agreeing with people and a career built on never being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He read the scene in 3 seconds. The fallen colonel, the young Asian medic, the colonel's wife in full righteous eruption, and the crowd that was watching to see what happened next. He made his calculation in the time it takes to draw a breath. He stepped forward. What's going on here? Karen turned to him with the immediate relief of someone who has finally found management. This person will not stop touching my husband, and she is completely ignoring me, and I want her removed. I've got it, Price said, in a voice he used for resolving problems at cocktail parties. He turned to Sarah. Specialist. Step aside. Sarah looked up for the first time. Her eyes found Price with an expression that was not anger and not disrespect, and not anything he had a good word for. It was the expression of someone who has just been asked to stop performing surgery mid-incision. Sir, she said, evenly, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell is presenting with what I believe is a ventricular arrhythmia secondary to heat stress, likely in the context of a pre-existing structural cardiac issue. He is in a compensated rhythm at present, but it is unstable. If I disengage treatment and he deteriorates, the window for safe defibrillation closes in approximately 3 to 4 minutes. I strongly advise against stopping the current treatment protocol. Price blinked. He had expected either compliance or argument. This measured, technical response was a third option he had not prepared for. Is there a doctor here? He looked around the crowd. Someone called base hospital. I have already called for a medevac helicopter, Sarah said. ETA 11 minutes. I am keeping him stable until it arrives. Specialist, I'm telling you to. Major Price. It was Marcus, standing up now from his crouch beside Sarah, straightening to his full height with the expression of a man who has made a decision that he knows is going to cost him something. Sir, I need to formally advise you that ordering a cessation of emergency treatment in progress on a patient in an unstable condition is a violation of. I know what it is, Sergeant, Price said sharply. He was not accustomed to being advised formally by an E5, while a colonel's wife and approximately 200 spectators watched. I'm managing this situation by removing the medic who is keeping him alive, Marcus said. The crowd held its breath. Price turned red. That is not. His pressure is dropping. Sarah's voice was flat and immediate. The monitor in Marcus's hand had issued a tone that nobody else in the crowd could interpret, but which made Price's head snap toward it involuntarily. He's converting. I need everyone to step back now. Marcus, stand by to shock. You are not authorized to. Price started. Charged. Marcus held up the AD paddles. Clear, Sarah said. The jolt was brief. Mitchell's back arched once. The monitor tone changed. Sarah pressed 2 fingers to his neck and released a breath so small it was almost not visible. Sinus rhythm, she said quietly. 68. We're stable. In the silence that followed, Private Torres noticed that his hands had been shaking so hard that the last 40 seconds of his recording were slightly blurred. He steadied them. He did not lower his phone. Karen was not yelling anymore. She was standing at the rope barrier with both hands pressed over her mouth, looking at her husband's chest, which was moving. Price was looking at Sarah with an expression she chose not to interpret. The helicopter will be here in 7 minutes, Sarah said, in the same voice she would have used to report the weather. I'm going to continue monitoring until transport arrives. She looked back down at her patient. I'll need someone to gather his personal effects. The medevac helicopter set down on the parade ground's emergency pad at 11:19 a.m., 7 minutes and 40 seconds after Sarah's prediction. The rotor wash flattened the remaining flags and sent a colonel's dress cover skittering across the pavement. The flight medic, a staff sergeant named Kozlowski who had 12 years of experience, and had done 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came off the bird at a run and dropped to his knees beside Mitchell. He opened his mouth to begin his rapid assessment and then stopped, because the woman who was currently running the case was already speaking. Robert Mitchell, 47, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army. Initial presentation: syncope with loss of consciousness, suspected heat stress exacerbation of an underlying arrhythmia. Sustained run of VTACH approximately 19 minutes ago, converted to sinus with a single synchronized shock at 200 joules. Current rhythm: sinus, rate 68, BP 94/60, SpO2 97% on non-rebreather. 2 large-bore IVs established, left AC and right EJ. Running normal, saline wide open. I would prioritize cardiology, consult with echocardiogram on arrival, rule out hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. He has had no prior cardiac events on record, but the pattern is consistent with a structural substrate. Kozlowski stared at her for 1.5 seconds. In his 12 years, he had never had a ground medic hand him a briefing that precise. "Copy that," he said, because there was nothing else to say. He looked at her uniform insignia. He looked at her face. He said, professionally, "Good work, specialist." And for a moment it sounded slightly absurd to both of them, though neither showed it. She stepped back as they loaded the stretcher. Karen Mitchell climbed in after her husband without looking at Sarah. The helicopter lifted. Sarah walked back to the medical station, sat down on the concrete barrier beside the folding table, and put her hands on her knees. Her uniform was marked with blood in 2 places, her gloves were off and folded in her pocket, and there was a small burn mark on her left forearm from where the AED discharge lead had briefly contacted her skin. Marcus stood beside her without speaking for a moment. Then, "For what it's worth." "It's fine," she said. "It's not, though." She looked at the parade ground, which was slowly returning to noise and motion around them, the way water fills back in after a stone is removed. "He's alive," she said. "That's the relevant part." From across the parade ground, she could see Price conferring with 2 other officers, his posture carrying the specific energy of a man who was now in damage control mode. She watched him without particular expression, the way she might watch weather forming on a distant ridge. "He's going to file something," Marcus said. "I know. You shocked a patient and refused a direct order. I know. Do you have a plan?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into the side pocket of her bag and took out her phone and her medical journal. "I'm going to keep doing my job," she said, and opened the journal to the page she had been on. By 2 o'clock, the base had the particular buzzing quality of a place in which a story is moving faster than the official version of events. In the company dayroom, 3 versions of the incident already existed. One in which Sarah had ignored a direct order and endangered a patient. One in which she had saved a patient over an incompetent commander's objection. And one, held mostly by people who had been close enough to watch, in which something had happened that nobody quite had the vocabulary for. Price had filed a formal report citing conduct unbecoming, refusal of a lawful order, and unauthorized medical procedures exceeding specialist-level scope of practice. The report was 9 paragraphs long and was technically accurate in its individual sentences while being thoroughly misleading in its overall shape. Karen Mitchell, at Fort Braxton Regional Medical Center, sat in a waiting room chair and replayed the last 2 hours in a way that kept rearranging itself uncomfortably. Her husband's condition had been stabilized, and the attending cardiologist had told her something about structural arrhythmia and an echocardiogram and treatment planning. She had nodded through all of it. She had not yet identified the moment when her certainty had begun to loosen. In the base disciplinary office, Sarah Chin sat in the corridor outside room C on a plastic chair that was bolted to the wall, waiting to be processed. She was reading her journal. She had been there for 40 minutes. Beside her, Marcus sat with his elbows on his knees and his phone turned over in his hands. He had called 3 people in the past hour and spoken to none of them. He was a man who measured his words carefully, and everything he was feeling right now was too large for careful measurement. "Sarah," he said. Do you ever?" "Never mind." She turned a page. "You want to ask me something?" "I want to ask you a lot of things. You've been wanting to ask them for about 11 months. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in her face. Not softening, exactly, but opening a fraction, the way a door that has been kept closed releases a breath of different air when it moves a centimeter. She folded down the corner of her page and looked at him. Ask, she said. Marcus opened his mouth. The glass doors at the end of the corridor opened. A soldier in a white MP uniform looked down at a clipboard and said, Specialist Chin? Major Price will see you now. Sarah looked at Marcus, and in her eyes there was something that was very nearly amusement. Later, she said, and stood up. From the window of the disciplinary office, if you looked at the right angle, you could see the base's main gate. A convoy of 3 black vehicles had just been waved through. Private Danny Torres, watching the convoy from across the quad, took his phone out again. The video he had taken was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. He watched it 3 times, standing alone in the shadow of the barracks, trying to decide what to do with it. He decided to keep it. For now. General Raymond Hargrove was 59 years old and had been in uniform for 37 of them. He had the kind of face that had been weathered rather than aged, and the kind of presence that most rooms registered before he spoke. He held 4 stars on each shoulder and carried them with the particular ease of someone for whom rank had long since ceased to be an external fact. He had not expected to be at this part of the base today. His visit to Fort Braxton was a scheduled inspection, and the original itinerary had him in the command briefing room until 4 o'clock. But his aide had noted, quietly, that there had been a significant medical incident at the morning ceremony, and Hargrove had made a slight revision to the afternoon schedule. He was walking across the main quad toward the administration building when Karen Mitchell found him. She had been given his position by a well-meaning lieutenant who had not thought through the implications, and she had come from the medical center in a state that she would have described as controlled and others would have described as barely. She was still wearing the silk blouse, which had a crease from the seat belt. She looked, on the outside, like a woman who was managing. She looked, on the inside, like a woman who was terrified that she had done something she could not quite name yet and needed someone with authority to agree with her before that nameless thing became clear. General. She stepped into his path with the confidence of a woman who had lived around rank long enough to believe that some of it had transferred to her by proximity. I need to speak with you about a serious conduct issue. I'm Karen Mitchell, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's wife. My husband was the one who had the cardiac event this morning. I'm sure you've heard. I have, Hargrove said. He stopped walking. Then you know what happened. This medic, this young woman, she was completely out of control. She refused orders from Major Price. She was performing procedures that were far beyond her qualification level. And she was, the way she spoke to me, the way she refused to respond when I. Tell me exactly what she did, Hargrove said. His voice was neutral in the way that a winter road is neutral, smooth and still, and potentially treacherous. Karen told him. She told him thoroughly and in detail. And in the version, she told him Sarah was reckless and insubordinate and had caused her significant distress at an extremely vulnerable moment. And at no point in the account did Karen Mitchell mention that she had called the medic a WH*re in front of 200 people and a young soldier's recording device. Hargrove listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell," in a tone that conveyed nothing at all. Then he turned his head, and his gaze moved across the quad to the administration building, where, through the glass of the corridor, a young woman in a medic uniform was walking out of an office door. And something moved in Raymond Hargrove's face that was not quite recognition, because recognition implies some element of surprise, and he was not surprised. He had known exactly where she was. He had made sure, quietly, 17 months ago, that she landed somewhere she could breathe. "Captain Chun," he said. The distance was 40 yards. She heard it. She stopped. She turned. She looked at him across the quad with those same level, unremarkable eyes. Then she stood up straight. Not the habitual, slightly relaxed posture of a field medic on downtime. The full, formal, military precision posture of an officer who has been addressed by a superior. Her chin came up a centimeter. Her shoulders dropped exactly 1/4 inch. A decade of training surfaced in her body in a single unfolding second. "General Hargrove, sir," she said. Somewhere behind Hargrove, Major Price had come out of the administration building and had gone the color of old chalk. Karen Mitchell looked between them, and for the first time since she had arrived at the parade ground that morning, she had nothing to say. Hargrove crossed the quad to her, and Sarah crossed it toward him, and they met in the middle the way 2 people meet who have stood in much harder places together and know it. He looked at her face, and at the blood on her uniform, and at the burn mark on her forearm. "Are you injured?" he asked. "No, sir. Incidental contact with the discharge lead. It's minor. Mm." He looked at it for a moment longer than the medical assessment required. "Walk with me." They walked. Price fell into step at a distance, close enough to be present, far enough to suggest that he was not entirely sure he wanted to be. Karen Mitchell followed, because Karen Mitchell was not a woman who accepted being left behind during conversations that were about her. "Mrs. Mitchell," Hargrove said, without looking back, "I'll address your concerns in a moment. Please wait." The way he said "please wait" was the way you would say it to someone who is holding a lit match near something important. Karen stopped walking. To Sarah, quietly, "Tell me what happened." She told him. 3 minutes, precise, no editorializing. She described Mitchell's presentation, the assessment, the intervention, the conversion, the transport briefing. She did not mention Karen. She did not mention Price's order or her refusal. She reported the medical facts, and only the medical facts, because that was what he had asked for. When she finished, Hargrove was quiet for 4 steps. "Good," he said. "And then, your assessment of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. HCM is the most common cause of sudden cardiac death in young to middle-aged individuals with no prior cardiac history." His ECG pattern showed voltage criteria consistent with left ventricular hypertrophy, and the arrhythmia was sustained and potentially malignant. "The echo will confirm or rule it out, but the management decision in the field was the same either way." "Who taught you the voltage criteria for HCM on a field monitor?" She looked at him. "You know who." A small silence. "Yes," he said. "I do." They had reached the center of the quad, where a flagpole cast a thin strip of shade across the pavement. Hargrove stopped. He turned, not to Sarah, but to the small collection of officers and civilians who had followed at a respectful distance. Price, Karen, 2 of Price's staff officers, and a handful of curious bystanders who had attached themselves to the event the way satellites attach to gravity. He spoke at normal volume, in the same tone he had used throughout, not theatrical, not cold, simply the tone of a man stating facts that he believes to be material. "For anyone who is unclear about who they are speaking to," he said, "Specialist Chin's designation is a field cover maintained by request and in full compliance with Army Regulation 600-8-2. Her actual rank is captain. Her educational qualifications include a Doctor of Medicine from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, completed in 3 years through an accelerated military scholarship program, and a doctorate in battlefield trauma management from the Uniformed Services University. She completed her residency in emergency medicine while simultaneously deployed to 2 combat theaters." Price's aide took a small step backward. "Captain Chun completed 3 tours with a Tier 1 Special Operations Support element, during which she was the primary surgical officer on 47 emergency procedures, 39 of which resulted in the patient's survival, a rate that the element commander described in his after-action report as, and I am quoting, statistically impossible given the conditions. She holds 2 Purple Hearts. She holds the Silver Star." Karen Mitchell's hand was no longer over her mouth. Her hand was at her side. She was looking at Sarah with an expression that had traveled from fury through confusion and arrived at something that had no clean name. She was also, Hargrove continued, nominated for the Medal of Honor following the Kandahar incident in 2021, a nomination that was converted to the Silver Star at her own request because she did not wish the attention. A small, involuntary sound came from someone in the assembled group. No one looked to see who it was. The emergency treatment protocol that Major Price cited this morning when ordering Captain Chun to cease treatment is Army Technical Manual 8-285-3, Revised Edition. Hargrove's voice had not changed in pitch or pace. Captain Chun drafted that protocol. She submitted the original version to the Army Surgeon General's office in 2020. The revision she submitted in 2022 is the version currently in use across all theater medical operations. The section that authorizes a credentialed field physician to maintain treatment continuity over objection of non-medical command personnel was written by her, at her insistence, following an incident in which a patient died because a non-medical officer halted treatment on authorization grounds. No one in the group was moving now. She is currently the leading candidate for the position of Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. That process is ongoing. I was not aware that she was fielding a conduct complaint today. or I would have rearranged my schedule further. He stopped. He looked at Price. Price was no longer chalk-colored. Price had moved past that to something beyond color, a kind of visual nullity, a man who was looking at the next 5 years of his life and finding them substantially changed. Major Price, Hargrove said, you will submit your incident report to my office before close of business today, along with a personal narrative explaining your decision-making process in real time. Not a revised version. A real-time account. Yes, sir, Price said. His voice was entirely serviceable. Nothing else about him was. Hargrove turned to Karen. She was a woman who had spent years in rooms where rank mattered, and she knew how to read a room, and she had been reading this one for the past 4 minutes with a sinking comprehension that she was trying very hard to keep off her face. She straightened slightly. She had nothing to say, and she was a woman who always had something to say, and the absence of it was the most honest thing she had produced all day. Your husband is alive, Hargrove said to her directly. He will require further treatment and quite possibly an ICD implant, but his prognosis is good. He is alive because the person standing next to me was present, assessed him correctly, intervened before his rhythm deteriorated to V-fib, and maintained treatment continuity over the objections of everyone around her. A pause. You may want to reflect on that. He said it without cruelty. He said it the way you say a thing that is simply true. Karen Mitchell looked at Sarah. Sarah looked back at her. She did not smile. She did not frown. Her face was entirely composed and entirely impossible to read, and Karen found, to her bewilderment, that she could not find a single point of purchase in it. No vulnerability to aim at, no anger to answer, no triumph to resent. Just a young woman who had her hands covered in her husband's blood and had never once stopped working. The formal inquiry opened on a Thursday. It was not the inquiry that Price had initiated. That report had been reviewed by Hargrove's staff and reclassified from conduct complaint to documentation of a clinical incident, pending outcome review. The new inquiry was of Price himself, and it moved with the particular efficiency that military investigations achieve when they are not afraid of their conclusions. The review board requested Danny Torres' video on the second day. Torres submitted it within 2 hours of the request, having kept it for 9 days in the specific belief that it would eventually be needed by someone who mattered. The 4 minutes and 12 seconds of footage were added to the record without annotation, because they required none. The footage showed, among other things, Sarah Chun performing a synchronized cardioversion with correct energy selection, correct timing, and correct post-shock monitoring in conditions of active obstruction. Karen Mitchell at the rope barrier, Price issuing a verbal order, Sarah acknowledging the order, explaining the medical risk, and resuming treatment. It showed Mitchell's monitor displaying a clear rhythm conversion 30 seconds after the shock. It showed the flight medic's face when he received Sarah's transport briefing. It showed, very clearly, what had been said. The base JAG office was busy. At Fort Braxton Regional Medical Center, Robert Mitchell woke up on his second day in the cardiac care unit to find a cardiologist named Dr. Freeman telling him about hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and a recommended course of treatment that included an implantable defibrillator and a significant revision to his physical activity parameters. He listened to all of it carefully. He asked questions. He was, by all accounts, an excellent patient. On the third day, his wife told him what had happened at the ceremony. She told him her version, which had been quietly revising itself since the quad, and which was now substantially different from the version she had told General Hargrove. She was trying, in her way, to give him a shape for the story that she could live inside. Robert Mitchell listened to that, too. Then he said, "Tell me exactly what she looked like when you said that to her." Karen frowned. "What? The medic. Tell me what she was doing when you said what you said." She was treating you. She had her hands. And she didn't stop. Silence. "She didn't stop," he said again, not as a question. He looked at the ceiling of his hospital room for a long moment. His heart, now properly monitored, was beating in a clean and regular rhythm. The ICD that would be implanted next week would catch the next episode, if there was one. There was going to be a next week. "I'd like to meet her," he said. Karen said nothing. "I would like," Robert Mitchell said, in the voice of a man who has just spent 3 days thinking about the finite nature of heartbeats, "to meet the person who kept me alive when everyone around her was telling her to stop." Dr. Evelyn Park's formal medical review, released 2 weeks later, was unambiguous. Mitchell's arrhythmia had been on the cusp of converting to ventricular fibrillation at the time of the intervention. A delay of any significant duration in defibrillation, the review estimated 3 to 5 minutes, would likely have resulted in irreversible cardiac arrest. The intervention, the report stated, was executed to the standard of a board-certified emergency physician working in a Level 1 trauma center, not to the standard of a field medic. The review board noted that recommendation. Sarah accepted the promotion on a Tuesday morning in a conference room that smelled of old coffee and new carpet, with General Hargrove present via video link, and 2 other officers whose names she would not publicly discuss. She signed 3 documents and shook one hand, and said, "Thank you, sir," without elaboration. Afterward, she stopped by Marcus's office. He was sitting at his desk with a stack of training evaluations and a look on his face that he had been wearing for 2 weeks. A kind of suspended disbelief, the expression of someone who has been told a thing they had suspected for a long time and is still processing the confirmation. "I have a condition," she said. He looked up. "Yeah. I've made a formal recommendation. It's already been submitted." She set a piece of paper on his desk. It was a memo recommending Sergeant Marcus Webb for immediate promotion to Staff Sergeant, citing specific actions during the Mitchell incident and a broader record of performance. At the bottom, in the signature line, the rank listed was not specialist. "They'll want you to consider the advanced medic course at Fort Sam. It's good training. You're better than your current role." Marcus looked at the paper for a long time. He looked up at her. "You didn't have to do that. You stood up," she said simply. "That cost you something. It was the right thing to do, and it cost you, and you did it anyway. I don't know a better definition of someone who should move up." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Then, the question I was going to ask you. In the corridor. I know what it was. Were you ever going to tell anyone?" Sarah considered this honestly. "No," she said. "Probably not." "Why?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the window, which faced the parade ground. The pavement had been scrubbed clean, the tent structures taken down, the ceremony long since processed into institutional memory. It looked, now, like nothing had happened there. It looked quiet. "Because what I am outside this base doesn't change what I am in front of a patient," she said. "And that's the only part that matters in the moment. The moment is always the same. There's a person who needs help, and I know how to help them, and everything else is noise." She picked up her bag. "The rank, the record, the protocol. It's all just the machinery behind the hands. The hands are the thing." Marcus looked at the memo on his desk. He looked at her. "You know," he said, "for someone who's terrible at talking about herself, you just said something pretty." "Goodbye, Marcus," she said. She walked out. The office she was given at the new posting had a window that faced east, which meant good light in the mornings. It had a desk and 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet, and a coat hook. It was not large. It was, she thought, exactly the right size. She put her bag down. She took out her journal. On the day she left Fort Braxton, the Base Family Support Fund received an anonymous wire transfer in the amount of $42,000, earmarked specifically for the upgrade of medical equipment in the base clinic. The donation was processed by the fund administrator, who noted the amount and the anonymity and did not investigate further. The clinic received 2 new trauma kits, 1 portable ultrasound unit, and a cardiac monitoring system that was, by a significant margin, the best available on any base of Fort Braxton's size. Nobody asked where it came from. In the cardiac unit, Robert Mitchell was preparing for his ICD procedure and had sent, through official channels, a formal letter of commendation addressed to Captain Sarah J. Chun, MD, PhD, whose name he had finally learned, and whose face he had never seen clearly, and to whom he owed the particular and irreplaceable gift of more time. Karen Mitchell had not yet signed the letter. She was still thinking about the expression on Sarah's face, or rather, the lack of one. The perfect, unbothered, unassailable quiet of a woman who had been called the worst thing Karen knew how to say and had simply kept her hands on the work. She was thinking about what that meant.